The autumn of 1944 descended upon the Western Front, not with the vibrant hues of harvest, but with a sombre, unnerving stillness. The silence of a battlefield holding its breath. Gone was the cacophony of summer, the frenzied clashes amidst the Norman hedgerows, the headlong rush across the liberated French countryside. Now, a tangible tension hung in the air, thick and heavy like the morning mist clinging to the war-torn fields. For before the weary but relentless Allied troops loomed a formidable barrier, a jagged scar upon the land itself, a testament to German resolve and engineering prowess. The West Wall, or as the Allies grimly christened it, the Siegfried Line. A labyrinthine network of fortifications, hundreds of kilometres long, stretching from the Dutch lowlands to the Swiss Alps, it snaked and coiled across the landscape, a concrete serpent promising to strangle any Allied advance. Pillboxes, their gun emplacements like malevolent eyes staring out across the killing fields. Dragon's teeth, jagged concrete pyramids designed to rip the underbellies of tanks. Reinforced bunkers, their steel doors sealed tight against the coming storm. All proclaimed a single, unwavering message: verboten, forbidden. Within the cold, damp confines of these fortresses, German soldiers, seasoned veterans and green conscripts alike, harboured a dangerous sense of invincibility. They were nestled within the very bedrock of the fatherland, shielded by layers of concrete and steel, by ingenious defences designed to repel any attack. The propaganda, relentless and pervasive, reinforced this belief. The West Wall was unbreakable, an impenetrable shield against the encroaching Allied tide. No weapon, they were assured, could pierce its armoured skin. No army could overcome its strategic depth. Yet, even as this false confidence bloomed within the German ranks, a silent storm was brewing on the other side of the line. In the sprawling logistical hubs and bustling ordnance depots behind the American lines, a new instrument of war was being prepared. A blunt, unforgiving weapon destined to shatter not only concrete, across trestle tables, illuminated by the cold glow of lanterns. The question was no longer if the line could be breached, but when and where the M12 would strike. The answer, they knew, would be delivered in a cataclysmic symphony of thunder and fire, a brutal testament to the relentless efficiency of American industrial might. The stage was set. The players were in place. And the opening act of this destructive drama was about to begin. For the men on both sides of the West Wall, the waiting was perhaps the hardest part. The German defenders, lulled into a false sense of security, performed their duties with a mixture of boredom and anxiety. They cleaned their weapons, polished their boots, and listened to the crackling voices on the radio, hoping for news of a decisive victory, some miracle that would halt the Allied advance. The American soldiers, on the other hand, were consumed by a more active anticipation. They pored over maps, studied aerial photographs, and practiced their drills with grim determination. They knew that they were about to face the toughest fighting of the war, and that their survival depended on their skill, their courage, and the effectiveness of the weapons at their disposal. Among these weapons, the M12 held a place of particular significance, a symbol of both hope and dread. It was the key to unlocking the West Wall, but it was also a dangerous, unforgiving machine, demanding respect and precision.
Its story, however, began long before its thunderous roar echoed across the fields of Western Europe. The genesis of the M12 can be traced back to the tumultuous years of 1940 and 1941, as the United States watched, with growing apprehension, the conflagration raging across Europe and Asia. The lessons of Blitzkrieg, the lightning war unleashed by the German Wehrmacht, were not lost on American military planners. They recognized the critical need for heavy artillery that could keep pace with the rapidly advancing armored spearheads. Traditional towed artillery, while powerful, was too slow and cumbersome to be conceived, a marriage of brute strength and mechanical ingenuity. The initial prototypes, cobbled together in the workshops and proving grounds of the American heartland, were far from elegant. They were rough, ungainly beasts, their massive guns perched precariously on open mounts at the rear of the chassis. Yet, even in their crude form, they hinted at the potential that lay within. A limited number of M12s, just over 100, were initially produced. They were subjected to rigorous testing and evaluation, but many were ultimately relegated to storage depots, gathering dust while the Army grappled with the complexities of modern warfare. At that time, American military doctrine was still evolving, and the precise role of self-propelled heavy artillery remained uncertain. The early campaigns in North Africa, characterized by vast open spaces and fluid maneuvers, did not demand the kind of long-range, bunker-busting firepower that the M12 offered. It seemed too specialized, a weapon without a clear battlefield. However, this perception began to shift dramatically in 1944 as the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, and the eventual push into the heart of Germany. Intelligence reports painted a stark picture of the Siegfried Line, a formidable system of bunkers, trenches, anti-tank obstacles, and hardened artillery positions stretching for hundreds of miles. Breaking through such defenses would require more than just infantry courage or tank assaults. It would demand artillery capable of smashing reinforced concrete, of silencing enemy guns, and of clearing the path for the advancing troops. Suddenly, the stored M12s gained a new, urgent importance. No longer were they relics of a bygone era, but essential tools for overcoming the most formidable obstacles that the Wehrmacht could present. Before deployment to the European theater, the M12s underwent extensive modifications and upgrades. Their engines were overhauled, their suspension systems were reinforced, and their guns were carefully calibrated to ensure maximum accuracy. Meanwhile, crews were assembled and dispatched to training camps in England, where they endured a grueling regimen of drills and exercise parts and crew members, and was also armed with machine guns, providing covering fire against enemy infantry or aircraft. Together, the M12 and the M30 formed a symbiotic partnership, a self-contained artillery team capable of delivering devastating barrages against hardened targets. The logistical challenges of deploying and maintaining the M12 were immense. Each 155mm shell weighed over 90 pounds. The gun's recoil was so powerful that the M12 had to be carefully braced before firing to prevent damage to the chassis. Crews often reversed the vehicle into a shallow pit, using the earth as a backstop, or they lowered a heavy spade at the rear of the vehicle to absorb the shock of the blast. Despite these difficulties, the M12 proved to be remarkably accurate and devastating when used properly. Its high explosive shells could penetrate even the thickest concrete walls, turning bunkers into tombs and silencing enemy gun positions. By late summer 1944, as American forces advanced relentlessly toward the German border, Units equipped with the M12 were assigned to specialized artillery battalions. They were not intended to serve as frontline tanks or mobile assault guns. Their purpose was different, more specialized. They were siege weapons, designed to destroy obstacles that no other weapon could touch. Their first major tests came as the Allies approached fortified towns and strongpoints left behind by the retreating German troops, and in each engagement the M12 demonstrated its devastating power. Pillboxes were reduced to rubble, gun emplacements were silenced, and infantry assaults that had once been stalled were now able to proceed with renewed vigor. The presence of the M12 also had a significant impact on the morale of American soldiers. Many infantrymen had previously faced the daunting task of attacking pillboxes with rifles, grenades, and flamethrowers, often suffering heavy losses in the process. Now, seeing the M12 roll forward, its massive barrel aimed squarely at a fortress wall, instilled a new sense of hope. It suggested that even the seemingly impossible could be overcome. By September 1944, as the Allies reached the Siegfried Line itself, the stage was finally set for the M12 to prove its worth on the grandest scale. The German soldiers, who had previously believed their fortifications
withstand the most punishing artillery bombardments. Their walls, in some instances, exceeded 2 meters in thickness, a seemingly impenetrable barrier against the onslaught of Allied firepower. Machine gun nests, strategically positioned, commanded sweeping fields of fire across open terrain, promising a deadly crossfire for any advancing enemy troops. Rows of dragon's teeth, like the spines of some monstrous beast, awaited any Allied armor foolish enough to attempt a direct assault. The very landscape had become an extension of German military might. The propaganda, ever present and ever persuasive, reinforced this sense of invincibility. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and official pronouncements all proclaimed the West Wall as unassailable, a fortress that would bleed the Allies dry, a bulwark against the encroaching tide of Bolshevism. For many German troops, weary from years of retreat and privation, the Siegfried Line represented the last shield of the Reich, the final bastion of hope. Initially, reports of the American self-propelled 155mm guns were dismissed with a mixture of skepticism and disdain. German intelligence had, of course, tracked the development of various Allied weapons, but they assumed that these heavy pieces would be too slow, too cumbersome to be effectively deployed in battle. The prevailing belief was that American forces relied primarily on overwhelming numbers, not specialized equipment, and that their artillery, while undeniably dangerous, lacked the precision and power to crack the strongest fortifications. Some officers, seeking to reassure their men, confidently asserted that the bunkers could absorb any bombardment short of a battleship's guns, that the Americans would be foolish to waste their shells on targets so well defended. This complacent assumption, however, would soon be shattered with brutal finality as soon as the M12s entered the fray. German observers stationed in observation posts and listening posts along the line began to report the truly terrifying effects of the American shells impacting directly on pillboxes been advertised as indestructible, only to realize that there was no escape once the bombardment began. The ventilation systems failed, the lights flickered and died, and the air grew thick with dust and the acrid smell of explosives. In the darkness, men screamed and prayed, their confidence replaced by a primal fear of entombment.
For many, the psychological impact of the M12's assault was even more devastating than the physical destruction. If the Siegfried Line, the pride of German engineering, could be breached so easily, what hope remained for the survival of the Reich itself? The German command struggled to adapt to this unexpected threat. Counter-battery fire was ordered, but the superior mobility of the M12 made it a difficult target to pin down. Unlike traditional towed artillery, which required time-consuming setup and dismantling procedures, the M12 could fire a few rounds and then quickly relocate to a new position before German guns could zero in. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft were dispatched to track the positions of the American siege artillery, but Allied air superiority often prevented them from conducting effective strikes. Even German propaganda, once so confident and bombastic, began to falter. Newspapers and radio broadcasts that had previously boasted of the Siegfried Line's impregnability grew increasingly vague and evasive when reporting on the fighting along the West Wall. Soldiers at the front no longer believed the official optimism, and rumors spread rapidly through the ranks. Stories of American monster guns that could erase concrete bunkers as if they were made of paper. Weapons capable of defying any known defense. The effect was corrosive, eating away at morale that had already been weakened by shortages of food, ammunition, and fuel, by the constant fatigue of defensive warfare, and by the ever-present pressure of relentless Allied attacks. For German officers, the sudden and unexpected vulnerability of the Siegfried Line was a bitter pill to swallow. Many had relied on the fortifications to buy time for a strategic counteroffensive or for political negotiations. Now, as they watched American artillery tearing gaping holes through their defenses, they realized that no strategic plan could succeed if the fortresses themselves disintegrated. An M12 rolling into position, accompanied by its M30 ammunition carrier, became a signal of impending devastation, a harbinger of death and destruction. In trenches and dugouts, men whispered that no wall was thick enough, no steel plate strong enough to stop the American shells. What had begun as unshakable confidence quickly morphed into paralyzing fear, a complete reversal that revealed the profound psychological impact of the M12 as much as its physical force. By the time winter descended upon the Western Front, the myth of the Siegfried Line lay in ruins, shattered by the relentless pounding of American artillery. The defenders knew, with a chilling certainty, that their shield had failed them, that their once impregnable fortress was now nothing more than a death trap, and behind every shattered bunker, behind every twisted steel door, behind every mangled row of dragon's teeth, was the echoing thunder of the American M12. A weapon they had never expected, a weapon they could not counter, a weapon that would haunt their every defensive stand. The M12 Gun Motor Carriage represented more than simply a single weapon system. It embodied a profound shift in American military doctrine, a change in the way that the United States approached the challenges of modern mechanized warfare. Traditionally, siege artillery had been viewed as a slow, cumbersome, and inherently static tool, tethered to fixed positions and reliant on extensive logistical support. The M12 challenged this conventional wisdom, demonstrating that devastating firepower could be combined with mobility, creating a weapon capable of keeping pace with rapidly advancing armored divisions. It was not designed to engage enemy tanks in direct combat, or to provide close-in fire support for infantry assaults. Its mission was more specialized, more focused, and ultimately more crucial. The systematic destruction of fortified positions that resisted conventional attacks. Its purpose was to break through the toughest defensive lines, to clear the path for the advancing troops, and to shatter the enemy's will to resist. American commanders quickly learned how to integrate the M12 into their overall strategic plan. Rather than scattering the guns across various divisions, they were grouped into independent artillery battalions,
A supply of ammunition, allowing the M12 to unleash its destructive potential without interruption. It also provided vital support for the crew, carrying spare parts, tools, and extra personnel. What truly set the M12 apart from other artillery pieces of its era was not simply its impressive gun, but the underlying philosophy that governed its use. In Europe, German defenses relied heavily on concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire entanglements, and interlocking fields of fire. Standard artillery bombardments could weaken these defenses, but they often failed to neutralize them completely. Infantrymen were then forced to finish the job, storming the fortifications at an enormous cost in lives, facing a withering hail of machine gun fire and grenade explosions. The M12 offered a different approach, a way to bypass these deadly obstacles and strike directly at the heart of the enemy's defenses. By introducing the M12, the Americans were effectively signaling that brute force could be mechanized, that overwhelming firepower could be delivered with speed and precision. Instead of expending thousands of shells in a general bombardment, a handful of well-aimed strikes from a 155 mm gun could obliterate a bunker, silence a machine gun nest, and save countless soldiers from being mowed down in a deadly crossfire. Training for M12 crews emphasized close coordination between artillery, engineers, and infantry. Once the M12 had torn a hole in the Siegfried line, combat engineers would rush forward to clear obstacles, detonate mines, and prepare a safe passage for the advancing troops. Riflemen would then follow close behind, securing the breach and engaging any remaining enemy resistance. This combination of heavy firepower and rapid exploitation represented a doctrine of combined arms at its most effective, a seamless integration of different military branches working together to achieve a common goal. It also reflected a growing belief among Allied planners that modern wars would no longer be won by single branches of service acting in isolation, but by tightly integrated operations, where each element complemented and reinforced the others. There were also tactical innovations born out of the harsh realities of combat. Because the M12 possessed limited armor and an open crew compartment, it could not remain exposed to enemy gap between static and mobile warfare, allowing the M12 to operate effectively in a wide range of battlefield conditions. The introduction of the M12 also challenged conventional German thinking about artillery warfare. Their doctrine had long assumed that Allied artillery would remain largely traditional, requiring lengthy preparation and extensive logistical support before launching an assault. The sudden appearance of heavy guns that could roll forward, fire with remarkable accuracy, and then vanish before counter-battery fire could be brought to bear, shattered this expectation. In effect, the M12 turned the battlefield into a place where no fortress was truly secure, no bunker was truly safe. The Germans were forced to adapt to this new threat, to develop new tactics and strategies for countering the mobile artillery, but they were often hampered by their own rigid doctrine and by the overwhelming superiority of Allied air power. While only a limited number of M12s were ever produced, their influence on the course of the war was disproportionately large. They demonstrated that specialized weapons, even in small quantities, could have a decisive impact on military operations if employed at the right time and in the right place. This principle would resonate in later conflicts, where precision and mobility increasingly outweighed sheer numbers, where technological innovation often proved to be the key to victory. By late 1944, the M12 had earned a well-deserved reputation as both a tool of destruction and a powerful symbol of Allied determination to overcome obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. Its doctrine was simple, yet undeniably effective. Strike hard, strike fast, and leave nothing standing that could resist the advance. In the crucible of the Siegfried Line, this doctrine proved not only effective, but decisive, rewriting the rules of how fortifications were meant to be defeated. The true test of the M12's capabilities came as American forces pressed deeper and deeper into the Siegfried Line during the autumn of 1944. What had previously been theoretical training in the relative safety of England and limited use in earlier smaller battles now became a brutal trial by fire against Germany's most formidable defences. The soldiers who manned the M12s found themselves at the very centre of
inherent risks. If German gunners spotted the M12 before it was properly positioned, its relatively thin armour and exposed crew made it an easy target. The machine, for all its destructive power, was ultimately a fragile thing, vulnerable to concentrated fire. Once in place, the preparation for firing was a frantic race against time. The rear spade was lowered with a clang, bracing the vehicle against the tremendous recoil of the gun. Ammunition, each shell nearly a metre long and weighing more than 90 pounds, was hauled from the accompanying M30 carrier. Crew members worked in a synchronised rhythm, their movements honed by countless hours of training. Lifting, loading, aiming and adjusting. Officers calculated distances to the targets, often obscured by earthworks, camouflaged netting, or embedded deep within the hillsides. The anticipation grew with each passing second as the men waited for the order to fire, their nerves stretched taut like violin strings. When the first round roared out of the barrel, the effect was immediate and terrifying. The ground shook violently, the air crackled with energy, and a deafening wave of sound washed over everything. The shell hurtled through the air with incredible speed, slamming into a German bunker with devastating force. Concrete exploded outward in a fountain of dust, debris, and shattered steel. The earth trembled under the impact, and a cloud of smoke billowed upward, obscuring the target from view. Infantrymen watching from nearby trenches or foxholes cheered, their voices barely audible above the din of battle. They knew that every direct hit meant fewer casualties when they eventually advanced, fewer lives lost in the bloody struggle for the Siegfried Line. For the German soldiers trapped inside those bunkers, the effect of the M12's bombardment was the polar opposite. Disbelief, followed by sheer, unadulterated panic. The walls that had been promised as unbreakable shattered with each successive strike, crumbling inward and burying the occupants alive. The carefully planned defences, the interlocking fields of fire, were rendered useless in a matter of minutes. Their world turned upside down in the midst of this orchestrated chaos. These actions, however, were never undertaken without significant danger. German artillery conditions. The sense of wielding immense power, of being able to reshape the battlefield with a single pull of the trigger, was intoxicating. Yet, they also knew that death could arrive at any moment, that their survival depended on their skill, their courage, and a healthy dose of luck. In one particularly fierce battle near Aachen, the M12s were tasked with opening a corridor through a heavily fortified ridgeline. Repeated assaults by infantry units had failed, and tank formations had been repelled by cleverly concealed anti-tank guns. The M12s rolled forward, each supported by an M30, and began methodically pounding the ridge, their 155mm guns spitting fire and destruction. After hours of relentless bombardment, the bunkers crumbled, the trenches were obliterated, and the once proud German defenses lay in ruins, a testament to the M12's destructive might. American troops surged forward, seizing ground that had seemed unattainable just the day before. For those who witnessed the scene, it was a vivid demonstration of the weapon's ability to turn stalemate into breakthrough, to transform the seemingly impossible into reality. Another striking example of the M12's effectiveness came during the push toward the Ruhr River. German defenders had heavily fortified the villages along the riverbank, creating a network of interlocking strongpoints that threatened to bog down the Allied advance. The M12s were called in to systematically smash these positions, one by one, their high explosive shells tearing through concrete and steel. With each barrage, church towers used as observation posts toppled, command bunkers crumbled, and machine gun nests were silenced. American commanders recognized that without the heavy guns, progress would have been far slower, far bloodier, and perhaps even impossible. The moment of greatest tension for every M12 crew was always the same: the agonizing seconds between firing the round and seeing the results. Would the shell hit its mark? Would the bunker still stand? Would the enemy be silenced? Relief and a surge of pride followed each successful strike, tempered by the ever-present knowledge that their survival depended on moving quickly, on preventing German counter-battery fire from
Overcome any obstacle, no matter how formidable. The destruction wrought by the M12 in the Siegfried Line was not the end of its influence, but merely the beginning of its lasting legacy. For the weapon had irrevocably changed the landscape of modern warfare, and its echoes would continue to resonate long after the guns had fallen silent. The war has changed, and this weapon was the herald of such a change.